Interviewees, what was something an employer said to you during an interview that made you not want to work for them? Me, what are your actual hours? Like if I looked at your employee sign in Sign Out book, what would I see? Employer. Well, we work hard, but we try to be reasonable, and I glance over at the rows of desks. They're full of people at 7:15 p.m. Employer. We also have an office-wide conference call every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. with our main office in Adelaide. No thanks, story 2. I forget the actual wording, but he said something about how everyone who worked there hated him and was out to get him, and he wanted to make sure I would take his side. Story 3. She told me that the team I would be working with had a lot of interpersonal issues, to the point where they couldn't fill out their own schedule without someone from HR mediating. Later on in the interview, I asked her why she liked working there, which prompted a long, awkward silence, followed by a half-assed response. Story 4. Interview for a transcriptionist job. Me with 20 years experience. I had just moved to a new town. Older lady gives me the test tape and says it's timed, and I shouldn't feel bad if I can't finish it all in an hour. I type up the 5 very short and medically easy reports in about 15 minutes. That includes proofreading them and checking to make sure that was all of them. I tell her I'm finished, and she's all flustered already, and goes and has a confab with another older woman. They acted like I must have cheated somehow, and I leave. Never hear back. Got a call from them 6 months later. I would have starved to death by then, asking if I was still interested. Nope. Interviewed at Kaiser Permanente for the same kind of job, was hired immediately at top wage based on my experience, not starting wage like most places do it. KP is a good place to work, Imho. Moral of the story, if someone says they have 20 years experience and can type 120 words per minute, believe them, especially if they do it in front of you. Story 5. Was being interviewed by a large West Coast search engine company several years ago. One of the interviewers noticed I had a thick southern accent and asked where I was from. I said Kentucky, and he asked me if it was true that a lot of people from there marry their cousins and if anyone in my family had done that. He was dead serious and wouldn't move on until I answered. I said no, and he looked at me like he didn't believe me. Super awkward. In the next interview, that guy's boss, he asked how my other interviews had gone, so I mentioned the remark, and he seemed very put off that I brought it up. Interview went really cold after that. Got a call from them a week later and said I wouldn't be offered a job. A month later, they called me back and asked if I was still interested, and I declined. Story 6. This place is really demanding because we practice a very high level of medicine. Our current interns are crap, and we have had several quit within 1 week of the program because they couldn't handle it. But that's just because they were weak and we are too good for them. Why aren't your grades better? You aren't a very great candidate. 2 weeks later, why didn't you apply for our program? You were one of our top candidates. Story 7. At the in-person interview, there was a panel of 3 people interviewing me for a position as an engineer with the city. Only one of the guys really talked, and the other 2 just kind of sat back and listened to what I had to say, interjecting only for minor clarification. Question 1. Please describe the wastewater treatment process. Be as detailed as your knowledge allows. I answer in detail, explaining that I had actually toured one of their plants recently and mentioned what processes they use. Question number 2. Are you familiar with insert process that I just explained? I looked at them kind of dumbfounded since I just explained that process to them, but I go ahead and explain the chemistry behind the process I had just explained to them in finer detail. Question 3. Are you familiar with the chemistry behind the process? At this point, I am 95% sure that working here would mean no freedom at all, as everything has to be done by the book to the point of absurdity. I can no longer control my facial expression, and it must have been apparent because the interviewers all apologized and said that they could only score me on how I answered each question as they came up. I ended up repeating myself for the whole interview, which went on for another 45 minutes. I got the job but declined. I'm not blaming the panel for this interview. I was just frustrated about the process, as most of those questions could have been put in a written examination of sorts, with just a few saved for the in-person interview. Also, I declined the job because I had received better offers elsewhere. Story 8. Interviewing at Freebird's restaurant, I was asked, "We believe there's a lot behind a name. Do you know where the name Led Zeppelin comes from?" Well, I'm a big fan of rock music. Sure, it's named ironically because a Zeppelin is a flying machine, but a Led Zeppelin wouldn't take flight. Supervisor. Actually, Led Zeppelin was named after the gym teacher of the founding members. He didn't believe in them, and they knew they were going to be a success. Not only that, but this restaurant is named after one of their songs. Me. Yeah, I thought Lynyrd Skynyrd wrote Freebird. Supervisor. No. And I really recommend you do your research to get to know the company if we do end up offering you a position. Story 9. Applied for a second part-time job to pick up some extra hours. Was told in the interview that I would have to quit my first job completely, unrelated area, and both are part of the local university, because it was a conflict of interest. My primary job is management in charge of 350 people. Made that choice pretty damn easy for me. Edit. My job is at a dining hall with a very convoluted chain of command. They keep a separate management chain for the student employees. Even though I'm in charge of that many people, there is still a lot of oversight above me, and the job is part-time. I mostly work there for the resume bullets it gives me. Story 10. Went in for a bartending job at a new chain restaurant that was opening up. At this point, I had 10 years experience, but I also had about a year going on at my day job, which was actually going to be my career. I still wanted to bartend though, because that money is too good to ever walk away from completely. So I go in and there's 2 interviewers, the GM of the new opening store and some hiring coordinator from their corporate office. They are interviewing the guy before me with the door open. I hear the woman ask what kind of experience he has, and when he tells her, she says, well, that's not really a high volume place. We need people that can handle high volume. And she sent him on his way. So I go in next and we start talking and she says, oh, it says here you don't want to work any weekday shifts. Why is that? I tell her I have another job, and she tells me they aren't hiring anyone that doesn't have completely open availability. And I said, didn't you just tell the guy before me you wanted people could handle high volume? For the last 10 years, I've bartended at the highest volume bar in Philadelphia. You're really not going to hire me because of schedule restrictions? She said they wanted open availability and asked if I'd maybe consider leaving my other job. I laughed, literally laughed at her and said, lady, I'm making $40,000 a year there, and I pretty much just started. I'm not going to give that up to work lunch. Then I thanked them and walked out. The GM followed me out and said he wanted to hire me because he knew who I was through an old coworker of mine, and that she was just being a Karen. He said if I changed my availability on the application, he could promise me I'd never be scheduled a weekday day shift. So I switched it and got the job, and he stood by his word. It's funny because the interviewer was the one I didn't want to work for. But once the interview was done, I never saw her again. She never worked in the actual store at all. Story 11. Applied at a local hotel while in college. Was advertised as checking people in, cash handling, computer experience needed, etc. I'm made to wait over an hour after scheduled interview time. Then the manager tells me that I will be working completely alone in the hotel with no help. I will be required to do front desk, food prep, housekeeping, go in rooms alone with guests, etc., all while making $8 an hour. I politely declined. Edit, by go in rooms alone with guests. I meant that if their toilet was clogged, I had to fix it. If they needed their TV fixed, it was me. Change the sheets? Me. Alone with no one else to know I was there. No security. I'm 5'0" and at the time weighed like 110. Story 12. I interviewed at 2 different hotels before I moved to the city I live in now. One is the hotel where I now work, but the other was a smaller place that was part of the chain where I'd been the AGM of a property 2 hours away. At the smaller place, they seemed really excited to have me. But once the interview was wrapping up, things took a downhill slide. I ended up sitting through the interview before being told they couldn't honor the pay I was promised. They didn't have the management position I was applying for, but they wanted me around anyway to do the manager's job for less pay. Literally told me, the GM is very overworked and would appreciate the help. I would be split between 3 different properties, would be paid and treated like a front desk clerk, but would be expected to do much more. Yeah, no. Story 13. When the boss told me about all the people that he hired before me were incompetent pieces of crap. I don't think all 8 people could have been that bad. Turned out he was the actual piece of crap. Should have heeded that red flag. Story 14. The employer was a publisher. First, they told me about the job, which was basically the entire duties of a graphic artist, plus the entire duties of a web programmer put together. And honestly, at the time, there were undoubtedly only a handful of people, including myself, who could do the job in the first place. Then, they told me how marvelous the company was going, with X billion dollars of profit in the last year, and how this meant I'd have a bright future there with lots of stability. I gave some thought to what they were asking me to do, what I was already earning, being just a web programmer without the graphic art duties, and what I'd wanted to earn for that job. I decided that I wouldn't consider it without a $30,000 raise. We got around to the discussion of what they were willing to pay for the position, and the number they mentioned was a $5,000 pay cut from what I was already earning. I explained that this was frankly insulting, and that they had no business wasting the time of the best people in the industry with interviewing for such a ridiculous salary. They told me that they're the publishing industry, and publishers traditionally pay less than other employers for the same job. I asked why. They said it was because publishing is a low profit margin industry. So I pointed out that they had some nerve to try to claim poverty to me after their little lecture about how many billion dollars of profit they'd made last year. Then I stood up and walked out. No way in hell was I ever going to work for that employer. Story 15. One of the interviewers made a comment implying I was dumb because I lacked domain expertise in software. that had nothing to do with the company I was interviewing or the role I was interviewing for. The look on the face of the other interviewer was priceless. Took a job on a different team at the same company instead. Story 16. At one of my first interviews after college, I was asked how available I was to work way more hours than had been advertised for no additional pay. Thankfully, I was hired at another place before I received that offer. Story 17. I'm a painter, and my chosen career has led me to some interesting characters. About 3 years ago, after moving to Boulder, I found myself responding to job postings that had any relevance to paint, painting, or art. So I see one posted by a guy starting a green, organic novartis paint company who needs someone to mix paints for him. Perfect. The details were vague, but I assumed he meant someone to mix pigments and make different colors, which sounded really awesome. So I get to the coffee shop where we agreed to meet, and turns out this guy hadn't had a haircut in at least 2 years. And he had this full lumberjack beard that he was not taking proper care of. Long story short, this guy tells me that he wants me to research how to make green paint, buy the supplies, mix it up, and bring it to him when it's ready. After that, I'd be setting up production of paint in my apartment until he had the funds to open up an actual store. Oh, and I'd be a partner in this business, so my payment would be some share of the profits once we were up and running. Later that day, I sent him a polite email saying that I was pursuing another job opportunity. Story 18. During a phone interview, I asked the potential manager about work-life balance. He started out by telling me that his team worked reasonable hours, which gradually turned into a rant about how his team never brought their laptops home at night and didn't reply to email after 7 p.m., despite him having multiple discussions with them about being more reachable. During the same conversation, he mentioned that the company had grown so fast that there had been a lot of battlefield promotions that put some less than qualified people in management, but that it had slowed down a lot recently. So it's hard to get promoted, and a lot of managers are unqualified. Story 19. Fresh out of college, I applied for a job as a developer at a company that made adver games and edu games. This was about 10 years ago when flash games were huge and many companies wanted branded flash games. Had a great interview. On the way in, I was shown around the office. Nice people, interesting customers, cool projects. Made a great impression with my portfolio. Was told I was the last candidate, and they were sufficiently impressed that we'd go straight ahead with the salary and benefits negotiation, which also went fine. At this point, it was 5 o'clock and they'd send me the paperwork for the contract. But since it was the end of the day, perhaps I'd like to see how they spend their evenings at this company. Okay. I was taken to a large attic space. Big enough to stand freely, but no windows. There were logs, like big real tree trunks placed around a fake campfire on one side of the attic. On the other side were tents, like proper camping tents with sleeping bags and stuff. I was asked if I played any instruments because every night they'd come up here with the whole group of employees, play music together around the fake campfire while they had dinner. Then they'd go back to work for a few more hours and sleep in the ducking tents so they could start early in the morning. Apparently, most people only went home on the weekend. I was just so absolutely stumped that I didn't even decline the job on the spot. I just thanked them for the interview. Got on the train home and just sat there mulling it over. Declined the job over the phone the next day, and the manager actually got pretty mad because he already accepted a job from a client and scheduled me on it. Story 20. After I told him my greatest strength was being a team player, he told me, "That sounds like some commie pinko bullcrap. This is America, where there's an eye in profit." Story 21. At my job, I currently have most people at this company hire women because we sell crafts, soap, girly stuff. Personally, I love hiring men. You can carry the big crates of this crap faster than they can. Even better, desperate men. It doesn't matter how crappy this job is, you need it, and we need you. Just got promoted to manager about 2 months ago. Yay. Story 22. Halfway through my interview, I was answering S's question when he looks at me with squinted eyes and interrupts me to ask, "Do you hear voices?" I stumble for a second, unsure of how to answer, before saying no. He looks around the room questioningly, and I go back to answering the original interview question. Throughout the rest of the interview, he keeps looking around room and not paying much attention to my answers. Towards the end, a light bulb goes off in his mind and he pulls an iPod out of his pocket. I forgot to turn off my ebook. Totally normal interview after that. Story 23. The employer asked me if I was comfortable confronting thieves or taking things out of people's hands and pockets if they tried to steal. It was a high theft store in a bad part of town. She wanted me to work night shifts alone while I did this. I'm a 5'3", 130-pound, unathletic girl. I'm not getting my ass kicked for a bag of chips. I work at another store in the same chain now. I found out that this is completely against company policy and recently had a meeting about someone who was shot and killed for trying to chase a thief. Story 24. Went to interview for a job as a summer day camp counselor at a community center. I had worked in multiple other positions and was excited to work closer to home. They made me wait 20 minutes past my appointment time first. not a deal breaker. Second, the man who was interviewing me would have been my boss, came to get me and didn't apologize, but instead began to complain immediately and very fast about his coworker who had ducked up that day somehow. Third, when I was in the interview, it was clear that he was not listening to me and was impatiently checking his watch while I was giving answers. This made me feel like I needed to cut my answers short because he was so hurried. Last, when I left, he didn't shake my hand and didn't get my name right. It was embarrassing for me to watch. Painfully terrible experience. Literally left saying, if they offer me the job, I'm turning it down. Story 25, I was applying for an unpaid internship as part of my master's degree. The interviewer showed up 30 minutes late to the interview with no explanation other than, I lost track of time. I'm not going to work for you for free if you're going to treat me like crap. Story 26. During the interview, the director I would be reporting to gave me a fairly detailed overview of why his operation was failing, and essentially asked me how I would fix it. I was leaving my big box company for a small local company. It was a bit stressing as I immediately thought this guy was just going to data mine me for ideas on how to fix his business. I gave him and the other interviewing managers a pretty high-level view of some strategies I would employ. In an interesting turn of events, they fired him and offered me way more money than I expected. I took the job. As someone who regularly hires for salaried positions, I think that there are definitely wrong and right ways to ask questions similar to what I was asked. The way in which my questions were asked were very wrong. Story 27. Interviewed for an IT job at GameStop. I thought, hey, I'm a gamer. I bet there's a lot of gamers working here. It could be a really cool place to work. Then the guy interviewing me mentioned that they had just removed all of the cubicle walls and then asked me if I could work well under pressure. Because every time something broke, I'd have 3 to 4 VPs physically standing behind me watching while I tried to fix it. I noped right on out of there. Story 28. Our business model is so good it's been mentioned in case studies in college textbooks. Clearly was a pyramid scheme and was trying to use that negative PAR in a positive way to swindle me. Edit. And now my top comment is about how I refused a job for Cutco. Great. Story 29 pulled me into a back room, told me a filthy joke, and I'm no prude, out of the blue, and then said he thought I'd understand because I wasn't like those other women. This from the area's most prominent eye surgeon. Story 30. I have a friend who has been placed on the dean's list at my university every semester. She has attended and is the top student in her particular discipline. She went for an interview for an internship, and the guy interviewing her made fun of her for having such high marks. Something about her being stupid for putting in so much effort, and she shouldn't be proud of her marks. Seems like the dude felt a little threatened or inadequate or something. Story 31. I should have listened to my gut and not gone to work for him, but my once boss said to me in the initial interview, I'm very hard to work with and I'm known to be kind of an ass. He didn't lie, at least. Story 32. Do you smoke cigarettes? I don't like people who smoke. Do you have a boyfriend? I would hate to have a crazy boyfriend come to the workplace for you. I was like, I don't smoke. I do have a boyfriend who is not crazy, and this interview is over. Story 33. I interviewed with the owner of a company that manufactured and installed solar panels. The interview was one math question, followed by 45 minutes of him trying to debate with me about his Ayn Rand-esque economic strategies and how anybody who wasn't working in a STEM field was wasting their potential. I decided I didn't want to work there after he said he was obligated by the free market to pay his workers as little as he could get away with. This was for a software developer position that paid $1 over minimum wage. I told him I didn't want to pursue the position anymore. And the next week, I got an offer for a different company for 2 times the salary plus better benefits. It's not the worst interview I've had, but it's the worst one that didn't involve me completely bombing it. Story 34. I interviewed at a violin shop for a sales assistant sort of gig like 4 years ago, and I was pretty eager for the job because A, I bought all my gear and got all my repair work done from there, and most importantly, B, had graduated college and really needed a job. I interviewed with another girl who had been there for a couple years in that position and had been promoted, and she legitimately spent over half of the time trying to talk me out of pursuing the job because the owner was so terrible to work for, yelling at his staff in front of customers, frequently making them cry, and even yelling at customers when they disagreed with him. They, unsurprisingly, had a really high turnover rate on account of his tantrum. Though to be fair, I would have still taken the job were it offered because I was desperate, but no luck. I was just in there a couple weeks back and the owner offered me a job on the spot. Tempting, though that may be, nah. I'll stick with a boring office job any day instead of having to work with his crazy ass. Story 35, I had an interview with a man and a woman. For a job they still had to create. They couldn't tell me anything about the job because they still had to set everything up. When it was my turn to ask questions, they couldn't answer anything. Me, what would a regular day at work look like? Them, we have no idea. We're still setting everything up, so we don't know yet. Me, okay, what kind of people would I work with? Them, Well, we're still setting up a team, so we can't tell you what kind of people are going to be your colleagues. Me. Will there be possibilities to grow? Would I be offered education? Them. Well, we're not sure. You'll be able to learn on the job, but offering education will have to be considered by HQ. It did sound like an interesting opportunity, though. And since these people were new, I thought we could learn each other a lot. I waited for 2 weeks since they told me they would call back. Didn't hear anything, so I called them back myself. They told me they weren't hiring anymore because they wanted to go for a different approach. This was a major international company. Story 36. Had a woman probably 4 or 5 years older than myself ask me, "What do you want to be when you're all grown up?" The way a teacher might ask their kindergarten student. I was 23 and completely caught off guard by the phrasing of this question. Usually, people would ask me what my professional goals are for the future. It felt awkward and very off-putting for some reason. Like I was seen as a child, not a potential asset, by someone near my own age, no less. Story 37. I applied for a job that was described as an ET job, very plainly, with a very reasonable salary. During the interview, I found out it was pyramid scheme job. Apparently, help desk to them meant sitting at a desk making phone calls to help people waste their money. Story 38, him. We intend to double our staff in the next 14 months. Me. Wow, that is very aggressive. Him. Yeah, I have no doubt that we will be acquired by then. Red flag. You are not building a company, you are building an acquisition target, and you are planning to cash out. If you don't want to work here long term, neither do I. Story 39. I had an offer from a large financial company as a data analyst. A few of the younger guys at the company took me out to dinner one night to try and wine-dine me. Well, a few of them were more interested in getting drunk off the company's dime than anything else. So near the end of the night, they became more and more candid. The comment that stuck with me was that one of them said something along the lines of, "Yeah, I just finished my second full year there. Most people quit way before then. It's really rare for people to stick around for 2 years at this job." Story 40. Him. If I go through the trouble of printing out this contract, will you sign in? Me. If it's good, and the contract period clauses are reasonable. Him. What's there to read? You have to promise to work for at least 3 years or you have to pay us. Me. Right. I'd like to see how much and what the rules are. Him. See, that's the problem with you millennials never wanting to commit to anything. Me. No idea. At this point, I just calmly got up and walked out while he continued to rant. Story 41. Enthusiastically asking when my birthday was. Not how old I was, but the date. First, it was on the application paperwork. Secondly, this was a government job. It would be in the HR system. Thirdly, how the duck is this relevant to the job? I found out a few weeks later when I had the job and my birthday rolled around, because that place would take any excuse whatsoever to eat cake, which of course I was expected to supply. Next time I get asked, I'm going to tell them it's December 25th, or maybe a week ago. Story 42. I had a guy once ask me if I could work with a bunch of women because, they're women. I didn't want the job, but my current boss counteroffered and I got a little raise out of it. Story 43. Interviewed for a job at a store that sold crystals, tarot cards, books on spiritualism. Basically a hippie shop, I guess. The woman interviewing me asked if I believed in unicorns and fairies. I told her no, and the rest of the interview didn't go well. Story 44. After a question about what I did in my leisure, I said I hung out with my friends, sometimes at the pub. After grilling me about what sort of alcohol and how much I consumed, he stared me down and asked me if I did substances, because, what occasional drinker doesn't do hard substances? I said no, but after that point, he made me feel like I was some sort of addict. There's nothing worse than someone making such an insulting assumption about you. Story 45. Had an interview at McDonald's, and the interviewer asked me why I was 18 and still in high school. Asked why I haven't had a job yet, and said how it was weird because most people start working at 16. Story 46. A bunch of years ago, I was trying my best to find a position as a part-time flight instructor as I was already working another full-time job. At the time, the airlines had just had a round of furloughs, and most flight schools had their picking of unemployed, highly experienced pilots looking to keep their heads above water. I was a year out of finishing flight school and had just a few hundred hours of flight time. For whatever reason, there was one flight school in my area that actually wanted me to come in and interview for the part-time position. The flight school had some equipment in their planes I wasn't experienced with, and a few planes I've never flown before. As I sat down with the owner of the school, we talked about this, and he said that I'll be enrolled into classes that'll get me the experience to safely instruct in the mentioned planes. I agreed, and the interview went on. Towards the end, he then tells me that I'll need to pay for the classes myself before I start flying. He continues by telling me he can work out a deal for me where I pay off the debt by working the front desk for free. He tells me I got the job and I can start tomorrow. He then shows me my schedule for the next month, and it's all front desk work. Did I mention I don't get paid? I turned down the offer. Story 47. For me, it was a series of events that led me to not wanting the job. But what the interviewer finally said was definitely the last straw. I was applying for the Walmart in my hometown during my senior year of high school, suburbs, approximately 50,000 people, and they had some customer experience testing that I went through on my own, on the computer, etc. I wanted money, even though my family was poor, and it would end up going to them anyway, so I could go out and do crap like any teenager. Interview date was set and whatnot, so I had my sister give me a ride to the Walmart. So I get there and I go to the returns area since I was never told where to go, and I asked them where they held interviews. They told me to go wait around the automotive section and they'd have somebody come get me. 30 to 45 minutes pass as I'm hanging around the paint and auto section. I noticed the workers all look they want to kill themselves, which was pretty off-putting, but I brushed it off. I eventually go back up to the returns desk and ask when someone is going to grab me. They again tell me to go wait in the auto section and somebody will come grab me. At this point, I'm getting a little impatient, but I figure I'll make the best of it and wait. Well, I waited for another 30 to 45 minutes until one of the workers asked me if I was waiting for someone since I was pacing around the auto section for what felt like 10 years. I told them my situation and they informed somebody, I guess, and I end up waiting for another 20 to 30. At this point, I considered just saying duck it and leaving. Told myself if they don't come grab me in the next 10 minutes, I would leave. Well, right as the clock chimed midnight, they finally get me into the room. At this point, I'm internally wanting to grab some nearby cords and hang myself. Anyway, I get into the interview room with a worker and who I had guessed was a manager of sorts. I waited about another 15 minutes because they were struggling to find my file. Well, they finally found it, and guess what? Apparently some other chick had come in earlier in the day for an interview as well, and some dingbat duck-ass had assigned the same number or whatever to the both of us. So it showed on my file that the first interview had already been completed at the time that the other chick's interview was completed. So this leather-for-a-skin manager turns around and tells me, well, I'll guess we'll have to reschedule this first interview so we can fix this. I literally wanted to get out of my folding chair and smack them across the face, WWE style, and give the people's elbow to these mother duckers. I left and didn't show for the rescheduled interview. I waited almost 2 hours for an interview at Walmart, only to have it rescheduled because somebody ducked up and I wasn't contacted about it because it went unnoticed. Story 48, a bridal shop. An older woman who went on about how most of the previous hires left without explanation, then proceeded to tell me a story about how girls would come in with prom dresses to get cleaned and there's so obviously cum stains all over them. She also went on a slight rant about women coming in to try gowns on and needing help zipping up only to see that they're wearing thongs. TMI, man. Story 49. One of the positions I applied for right after uni was copywriter at an ad agency. Company looked pretty cool on paper. During the interviewer kept insinuating that he was connected in the government and the mob, which I think was supposed to impress, intimidate me. The pay was not bad for a fresh grad, but I still noped out of there real quick. Story 50. You are required to have a truck. Why? To carry a ladder. I don't have a truck. Then you'll need to buy one. Good day to you, DirecTV contract installer company. To be fair, I had rails on the top of my car and could have put a ladder on it. The guy knew this. Story 51. This actually happened about a month ago. I was interviewing for a buy role at a Fortune 500 company in my city, and I inquired about what the work-life balance is at the company and how collaborative the team I'd be joining was. The hiring manager and the team lead in subsequent interview both said something along the lines of, "It's very quiet here. Most people don't talk to a single person outside of lunch hours. I think the whole team prefers to just put their heads down and get the work done, rather than wasting time talking. Most people on the team tend to be available throughout the evening and weekends as well, but we all believe in what we do. Maybe that's the kind of professional environment preferred by some people, but I couldn't imagine spending 40 to 60 hours a week at one place and having zero relationship with anyone there. Couple that with intimating that it would be a poor fit if I wasn't working nights and weekends. And it was very easy to tell them as I was being escorted out that it didn't seem like a good fit. Story 52. In the early 2000s, I answered a newspaper ad to be your own boss, make your own hours, travel and get paid. I was 16, and of course I wanted to be my own boss. The office was creepy as hell to start with, and the dude looked like a caricature of a 1970s used car salesman. Mass interview type situation, about 9 people. Everyone sign here, date here, sit there, I'll call your name. I get called back, and he starts in on a sales pitch about all the money I'll be making and how easy the job was and how I could move up if I was really dedicated. When I would ask him exactly what I would be doing, he would dodge the question. Over and over, he did this song a dance around my questions. Finally, he told me that he couldn't tell me what the company did until I made it to the third interview. 16-year-old me was almost 100% sure that I was about to accidentally join a cult. I told him very bluntly what I thought about the whole thing and walked out. Come to find out, it was one of those pyramid schemes where you have to buy like $600 worth of kitchen knife sets up front to get you started. Then, the dude drives you around in a van all day, and you try to sell them to housewives and old ladies in mall parking lots or talk your friends into buying sets too and being your own boss. Ended up getting a job as a backhoe operator for one of the most honest and all-around best dudes I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. He taught me a lot about the skill sets and work ethic that 10 years later would help get me hired into my dream career. Thanks, RD, Story 53. I had an interview recently that threw up red flags all over the place. The person interviewing me is the head of this 40-person company, a pudgy man in his late 50s. We go into his office and he has a senior analyst who happens to be female, I promise I mentioned this for a reason, waiting for us. She asks me some technical questions and I answer them without any problem, which I expected because they aren't doing anything I haven't done before. Then he begins on his round of questioning. The first red flag is that even though I have 10+ years experience with data analysis, he really harped on my lack of experience in the healthcare data field. I explained that I would like to get into healthcare because it is a growing industry and throw out all the correct but canned answers to these kind of questions. But he just won't let it go. I am sitting there thinking, if you had such a problem with my lack of experience, why even bother with the interview? He then starts in on how he wants people with a passion for the field. And again, I'm thinking, how many people are you going to find in healthcare data analysis that are truly passionate for their field, especially for what they were offering? It's just a small healthcare information company, paying average wages with average benefits and no real other perks. It is not like I was applying at Google or something crazy. He asks more questions, and I feel like I'm throwing out good answers. But every time I answer something, he says, well, what if X occurred? Often he would cut off my answer to change the scenario mid-answer. I'm like, well, that changes the scenario, so I would do X instead of Y, like I previously said. It was just this very odd feeling, like he didn't want me to answer a question correctly. If I did, he would change the scenario to make it so my first answer was wrong. Finally, as he is walking me out, he asks if I would like him to show me around. The work area is mainly a big open room with a bunch of half-height cubicles where the analysts work. The senior analyst who asked me technical questions is in the cube farm. There are a few offices and conference rooms, but I can see at least 35 of the 45 people in the office right now. The weird part, every single one of them was a woman. I'm not talking most or a majority or anything like that. I didn't see another man in the office other than the boss. I have no problem working for or with women, but it kind of all clicked together. This guy did not want me here. I was token male interview so that he could continue to grow his harem. I knew I wasn't going to get an offer, but there's no way I would have taken this job anyway. Even if I was the perfect employee, if those women gave me the slightest amount of attention, even work-related, it would have bothered him to no end and created a really horrible work environment. A couple days later, I got an email saying that they were going in a different direction. I have never been happy for a rejection letter. Story 54. They didn't even ask real questions. They just asked when I could start. It was a healthcare position. They clearly didn't care about their patients. I quickly decided anyone willing to hire me off the streets without questions probably wasn't going to be the best company to work for. Story 55. I used to work in management for a financial firm. I was in the process of looking for a lateral move within the company and had lined up a few interviews. They all went about the same way. You'd meet with 2 team managers followed by the VP. Each would ask you a series of 6 random questions from a 3-part interview packet. My last interview was at a different site than my own. I showed up early and found my way to the location I was told to be at for my interview. The problem was they literally gave me a room that was full of over 500 call center employee cubicles with no actual direction on who to talk to. I wandered through the aisles of cubes until I found one that said admin. The admin had no clue about the interview. After about 15 minutes of her trying to figure out what was going on and me showing her the email from the VP, scheduling the interview, she just sent me to a conference room. I waited another 20 minutes before the first manager came in. She rushed through the 6 questions, then told me she'd get me the second manager. I offered her a copy of my resume since traditionally you bring 3 copies and each would take 1. She wasn't interested. The second manager came in close to 40 minutes later. She thought she was the first manager to interview me. She asked me the same 6 questions. I informed her after the first question that I'd already been asked. The questions from section 1 of the packet. I gave her my resume, prepared to reference it for the next questions. She refused to acknowledge my resume yet again. I was ready to walk at that point, but I figured since the VP had scheduled the interview, I may as well give them the courtesy of thanking them for the opportunity. Rather than the VP, a third manager showed up about 20 minutes later and asked the same ducking 6 questions. I once again told them I'd answered those questions. They took my resume and said they'd give it to the VP, but that the VP was too busy to do the interview today. I'd already planned to not take the job in such a train wreck of a department, so I decided to ask, why does it feel like this interview is wasting everyone's time? She just shrugged and said, if you get the job, you better get used to this. He's unorganized and never communicates anything to anyone. No one communicates around here, but you get used to it. I smiled, said, Thank you for the opportunity, but I'd rather not get used to it. I'm officially withdrawing my application. Story 56. Oh man, I was unemployed for like 6 months, and my uncle told me about a plumber hiring for an apprenticeship, so I went, and the guy lived in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like 30 minutes from a town. I get there, and after saying hi, he tells me to jump in his truck, and we start driving. Immediately tells me the job's only $8 an hour, but it's under the table, so I can file for benefits and not pay taxes. I was told 10 an hour, so I was like, nope, I'm good, but I couldn't say it because I was already in his truck and couldn't get out. He proceeds to drive me to a job site to meet the crew. It was 3 guys who I was pretty sure were all felons. This was confirmed by the boss right after we left, and that 2 out of these 3 guys couldn't read and didn't even finish out junior high. I'm walking around this place, and he says I could start right now. I tell him I have plans, so I can't. After an hour at this site, we get in, and he tries to take me somewhere else, but I say I need to go, so he begrudgingly drives me to my car. On the way, he tells me that sometimes checks can be up to 2 weeks late, but I always pay my guys. I couldn't even tell him no. I just blocked his number and didn't show up on Monday. He called my uncle, and I said a bunch of crap, and my uncle asked me about it. When I told him how the interview went, he laughed and said, dodged a bullet. Story 57. I had an interview for a job at Taco Bell during my first semester of college. I explained that I had classes every day except the weekends, and I was only looking for a weekend job. You would be all right with skipping class to come to work, right? Sorry, but I'm not going to miss extremely important classes to make tacos at $7.25 an hour. They still offered me the job, but I wasn't comfortable taking a minimum wage job that expected me to put college second. Story 58. I'll micromanage if I need to. Top 10 signs you do not belong in any type of management. Number 5. You believe micromanagement is a legitimate and effective way to ensure things get done. Reality, everyone on your team hates you and would accomplish more without you. Story 59 was having a phone interview for an administration job. The call was with the CEO of the company, and he basically said, we usually hire females to be our assistants and prefer it if we hire males to be our advisors and salesmen. But I suppose in this day and age, we have to consider everyone for everything. I said, yes, you do, but I'm no longer interested, and hung up. Story 60. I once applied for a job sharpening massive paper cutting blades. The interviewer said, yeah, I need a replacement. I've lost too many fingers to keep working. He was indeed missing many fingers. Most shocking of all, he got really pissed when I finally said I wasn't interested. Story 61. I flew to the city from my hometown to interview for a specific job in the defense industry with a large security company. The job I was interested in was about 20 minutes away from my mother's house, where I would be staying if I got it, and they had a very appealing permanent roster and working hours. I spent a good half an hour talking about the job with a manager who worked for the company over the phone, who talked me into taking time off from my current job to fly down for an interview. When I made it through the group interview and aptitude tests, I came in for my one-on-one interview. The guy is sitting behind the desk, and without even looking up at me, he just says, well, we're going to need you to start tomorrow at the airport. Is that a problem? I kind of just gather myself for a second and say, hi, I'm Name. Nice to meet you. I'm actually here to interview for the job at base name on the defense contract. Him. Your experience is all working in airport security. Why would I put you on a defense job? Me. I'm interviewing for this job because I wanted a change in scenery and to increase my skill set. I only flew here for an interview because I was told that there were spots available at that site. Him. Well, beggars can't be choosers. You want to pay your bills or not? Me. I'm still employed by other security company, and they pay me double the hourly rate your company offers for airport guards. If I wanted to keep working at an airport, I'd do it for them. I'm here because I want to move to the city and experience something my hometown doesn't have to offer. If you can't offer me a position at base name, then I'll have to thank you for your time and excuse myself. Him, grumbling. Well, all right, go to the room down the hall, and they'll give you the defense pack to fill out for your security clearance. Me. Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to ask me? Him. No. Me. All right, it was nice to meet you. Him. Sean. He didn't shake my hand, and I left, seriously questioning if I wanted to work for a company with such a 4A HR guy. Luckily, after taking the position, I had nothing more to do with him. Story 62. During a technical interview, I asked one of my interviewers how he liked working for the company. He said that he didn't really know because this was his first and only job out of college. After a few moments, he looked at me and very seriously said that I wouldn't enjoy working there. You know something's wrong when an interviewer can't even fake enthusiasm about their company. Story 63. This was just a phone interview, but it was horrible. I was just out of high school and applying for junior AT jobs and received a call back for a phone interview. Some of the highlights from the call. Asking if I have MySpace, pre-Facebook days, and then searching for my account anyway, then discussing my profile with me over the phone, setting a date for the interview, and then Shashna saying how he does have some things to do, so I could go with him to pick up computer equipment. Said we could go pick up some ice cream too. Asked how I would be getting there. And when I said my boyfriend would probably take me, said there's no parking here around, so he would just need to drop me off, and then I can call him later to pick me up again, not to hang around. Talked to me about food and said I should go around to have dinner with he and his wife. One night, I was way too awkward to say anything on the phone, so I just agreed to the interview and got the address from him. I then decided to Google the company more and realized the address he gave me didn't match the address for the company. So I called back the day of the interview and said my mom broke her leg, so I needed to look after her. Again, awkward 17-year-old, and he wanted to send her flowers and offered to take me to the hospital, etc. After that, I changed my resume to only have mobile number and email address. Before it used to have address and home phone, never again. Story 64. First one. He said he thinks of himself as the office dad. He insists that employees follow his advice on saving for retirement and they go on a group vacation each year. He also told me he was the only fully actualized person you'll ever meet. In reality, he was the pretty useless, egomaniacal husband of the CEO. I liked her plenty. He creeped me out. He walked me out and then pressured me to make a decision on the spot. Don't leave me hanging. Okay, nope. Second one. Guy has a southern accent. He's talking faster than a New Yorker. Can't look me in the eyes, just stares at my chest. Asked me for feedback. Told him he wasn't trustworthy in story 65. And many times the red flag is that there's a job opening to begin with. If you ask around before the interview on why the position is open, you may get some insightful answers. Things I've heard when I asked them. He went on to a better company. He couldn't work overtime without pay. The last 3 guys were useless. He didn't want a pay cut. No one else took a pay cut. Sometimes you work weekends and holidays as a favor to your company. Not for money. Maybe, but then pay me back with days off. He didn't want to work hard. The guy that quit had been working 80-hour weeks for a year. Of course, many of them I found out after I started. Story 66. The interviewer asked me what classes I'm taking. I told him I was learning assembly language. He sarcastically laughed and said I would never use it. I knew I wouldn't use it, but still pissed me off. Story 67. Do you have kids? He knew that asking was illegal. I knew that was illegal. He knew that I knew that was illegal. And we both knew I was going to answer because I wanted the job anyway. This was at a fairly nice management consulting firm. I'm an attorney. This was not in the US, so American law is irrelevant. Story 68. I have experience in what is currently a very trendy, specific technical skill set that not a lot of people have, so I get headhunted a lot. At this one company, I ended up getting a second interview, which was a half-day gauntlet, where I met people from several different departments, one after the other. Each person brought their own set of questions, and I started to notice that, too, many of the questions were the if you were a hamburger. What kind of hamburger would you be variety? So I started asking more pointed questions about the role itself and the platforms they used, and I could not get any straight answers from anyone. No one who interviewed me had any real familiarity with what I'd be doing, which was strange. Finally, I met with the CMO, a self-described marketing genius. He asked me yet more fluff questions, and when it was my turn, I asked him to please outline the specific duties and expectations of the role and the platforms that were used. That's when I found out that A, the company bought out another company that used to handle that role. When they did, everyone in that other company's department quits. When everyone quit, this company just outsourced everything to an agency. E, no one at this company really knew what that agency did. E, no one really knew what I would be doing. Furthermore, the CMO then said with disdain that if I was the type of worker who needed guidance/S or training/S to figure my way around, then maybe this wasn't the job for me. Yeah, what kind of lazy weirdo needs guidance or training for processes as a new employee? I intentionally sandbagged his last fluff question and didn't even follow up after that one. What a crap show. Story 69. I had an uncle pass away very unexpectedly the night before my job interview. When asked how soon I could start, I explained the situation, and her reply was, well, I'm sure he'll be buried by Friday, so you can start then. I should have known then not to work there. I only lasted 6 months in that hellhole. Story 70. By the way, the position only exists in Phoenix, Arizona. You'll have to move out here to finally accept the position. This was after originally confirming the position would be available as a remote work opportunity. They even flew me out to their office in Phoenix to meet and interview with the team. They also literally spent 9 hours straight interviewing me when they flew me out. Every single one of the 20 or so employees spent time asking me questions that day. And this was after 3 hours of phone and Skype interviews with the specific people I would be working directly with. Imagine their shock when I ended up turning down their offer letter. Another fun one was, after promising to meet my salary expectations, a few days later offering the position to me with one caveat. We realize that the cost of living differences make it hard for us to meet your salary expectations. So we're actually setting your salary at $20,000 below what you requested. But you can earn your request if you meet these impossible work output expectations. Story 71 was in my early days within finance, and Still learning the job, it was for a permanent position, and I was to be interviewed by a panel of 3. I get there and it starts. From the beginning, you could see that there is 1 alpha and 2 yes men. Very quickly, the alpha asks which professional body within finance I'm attempting to qualify in. I inform him and he states, "Aka? That's rubbish." A short while later, he goes off on how he has fired countless people, and he never hesitates to fire anyone. I had shut down by then, thinking I never want to work here. On the way home, I called the recruitment agency and was informing them how unprofessional the interview had been, and they replied, "A lot of people are stating this. We may not be working with thus client in the future." Story 72. I once went for a job interview at 16 years old to work in a local nightclub behind the bar. Nowhere in the advert did it specify that it was over 18s only or anything. So I thought I'd give it a try. The worst they could say was no, or find me something else that didn't have an age restriction, like coat check or something, right? Wrong. During the interview, the guy doing the interview says, "Your CV says you're only 16, is that right?" I say yes and explain about try my luck after the advert didn't say over 18. Guy literally rubs this thighs, gets up and goes, "When can you start? I like 'em young." I noped the duck out so hard, I'm fairly sure I left a trail of dust. Story 73. He was going to pay in Bitcoin, which I was fine with, but wanted to make sure I wasn't going to move my money out of Bitcoin, which I wasn't fine with. Employers, you have no say in what people do with their money. None. To even hint at such a thing is insulting. Story 74. I had a guy call me last year to offer me a job at his firm. I worked for a different company in the same industry that wasn't really a direct competitor, but he really wanted me because it's a niche industry, and I was one of only a few people in our city who had the background he was looking for. I was willing to hear him out at first because he was offering a lot of money, and I'd already been thinking about changing jobs sometime soon. So I get on the phone with him, and this guy ends up being pompous. First, he bashes my current employers, who, despite some differences, I had a lot of respect for. Then he asks for my current salary. I say that I'm not comfortable sharing that just yet. Guy goes, "You know, I could just call your HR department right now and they'd have to tell me. Could get you in a bit of trouble for talking to me too." I'm sorry, what? I thanked him for his time and told him I wasn't interested. Then, of course, I went straight to the HR director, who was a very good friend, to tell her what had just happened, and we had a good laugh about it. She told me that I should have had him call her so that she could have told him where to stick it. Really wish I'd thought of that. Don't be a git to someone you're trying to poach from another company. Story 75. I did a Skype interview for a job that had been advertised as full-time. Early on in the interview, they said that the position they are looking to fill is actually part-time without benefits. No thanks. I'm not going to leave my current job to come work part-time. Story 76. He asked why I left my teaching job. I replied that I felt like we were the ultimate scapegoat. Kid didn't do his homework. Teacher gave too much. Kid got mouthy with the teacher. Teacher should be more respectful of how they express themselves. School district in dire straits financially. Teachers asked for too big of a raise. He said, inset, snide tone. "Well, don't you take any personal responsibility?" He continued on with crap responses the entire time. I called the HR rep after that and took my name out of the running. Story 77. The rate we are willing to pay is less than 1/3 of the going rate at any other consultancy and less than 1/4 for the good consultancies, majors. Oh, and that is inclusive of the 9% mandatory superannuation, 401k for a contribution. Days on the tools are 12 hours, and all paperwork is to be completed each evening, own time. They had been burned in the past by training people up and those people leaving. This time they wanted a dual degree in a particular science and a specific branch of engineering, and 5 years experience minimum. I have all these things, including a master's and experience. Also, the advertised job was city-based. In reality, based in the middle of nowhere on a rotating roster. I assumed they were lowballing, so I counter-offered. I got told no. I told them that I thought they were devaluing the rather niche professional industry we are both in, and that I would not work for that, nor would anyone I know. I walked out. I know of 2 others who interviewed later and also walked. Last I heard, they were on the verge of losing a major contract due to inability to supply staff. Story 78. The interviewer kept asking me where my parents and grandparents had grown up and what church they went to. When I asked him how this would impact my suitability for the job, he said, "We need to know that you're the type of person our clients can relate to." Story 79. I was still in school and I applied for a job to sell junk to tourists in a tiny store in a busy touristy section in Heidelberg, Germany. I would have been 1 out of 2 employees, the second one being a lad slightly older than I was. When I met the guy I was supposed to work with, I shook his hand, said, "Hi, I'm Chris." And he went, "I don't know how things are handled at your university, but here in the business world, people refer to one another by their last name." Story 80. I went for an interview with a company in the UK that builds super resolution microscopes. real fancy pieces of tech. The boss was an ass in multiple ways. 1. He kept me waiting around outside in the rain for 10 minutes before answering the door and inside the office for around 2 hours throughout various parts of the day. 2. He made me do a 2-hour optics exam, even though I have a PhD in optics. 3. He said multiple times that he confiscates the mobile phones of employees, even though it wasn't a customer-facing job. But the thing that really put me off was that I only met one other employee the whole day. When I asked where the rest of the staff were, he said that it was only the one other guy. Thing was, their office space was enough for around 30 people. It was then I realized all other employees quit because the boss was an asshat. Oh, and their pay offer was really low. Duck that. I did not take that job. Story 81. Boss. I've gone through 7 other personal assistants this year. It's not like the job is that hard. Took the job and ignored this important red flag. No, the job wasn't hard. The boss was just an absolute monster. Left after 4 months. Story 82. I was interviewing at a tech firm. The HR director scheduled the interview for 6 a.m. and showed up herself to conduct it. I just graduated from university at 30, so I took my studies seriously and had a fair number of academic achievements and a high GPA. The HR director said, "Well, do we really want the best and the brightest? They have their own ideas. We actually have to pay them. I'd rather hire someone for this position who's grateful and just does what I say." The position was working as a liaison between offices on the west coast of the United States and Ireland. So when it came time for me to ask a question, I asked what my working hours would be, since I assumed that I'd have to be in the office and be accessible to both the American and Irish teams for at least a portion of the workday. She asked me what I meant. I explained time zone. A few months later, the tech firm announced that it was substantially in debt and was being bought by a competitor. Story 83. Not my story, but a good friend's. She was interviewing with a Christian television company. She had graduated university in May, and this interview was in the fall. This network has a reputation for treating people poorly, but my friend got the interview from a recruiter and was kind of desperate for a job. First, the interviewer brought her husband into the interview. She normally has an assistant for interviews, but they weren't available. I do not believe her husband worked at the company. Second, she asked, "Are you married?" Third, she asked, "Why do you think you don't have a job yet?" My friend gave her an answer about not finding a job that was the right fit for her. The interviewer then says, "I'm just going to be honest with you," which was a good sign she was about to be rude as hell. She goes on to tell my friend that she doesn't have a job because she's kind of quiet. It was a pretty compelling reason because no introvert has ever gotten a job before. I should mention that this interviewer was 25 years old max and got her job because her daddy owned the network. Story 84, it went something like, "As part of our community initiative program, we require all our employees to participate in our volunteer program 8 hours a week." Okay, what is your volunteer program? It's here in the office. So you want me to work for free 8 hours a week? No, we need you to volunteer your time in order to be a positive example of community service. Sorry, I'm worth more than that. Have a good day. Story 85. Third interview for a recent graduate position, just an internship with a small wage, quite common in Italy as a first step after a meso. I'd already passed the written test, chemistry, biology, and various technical questions. Then, the triple interview round, English assessment, HR, managers from various areas of the company. They finally called me back again. I was so happy, even though it took me more than an hour of driving to get there every time. The job description they finally gave me, "You will be just like a machine operator, just cleaner." And among the job duties, there's cleaning just like at home. Well, this is not something you'd love to hear after all those technical interviews, but I tried and said, okay, well, I have to start somewhere. Plus, I love to learn new things. Trying to show my enthusiasm. The employer shakes his head, smiles in a condescendent way, and says, "Well, there isn't much to learn in this job. You just need to mix 2 components and leave it as it is. Simple. Call me choosy," as some Italian politicians love to do, but I felt very mortified and left. Hope to find something more rewarding soon. Story 86. Straight out told me they didn't like the look of me and belittled my application. Said they would only take me on as a favor to the person who recommended me. I really needed a job at the time, but refused to answer any of their follow-up calls. Story 87. I was being interviewed for a job at a pharmacy as a dispenser. The pharmacist who was interviewing me was interrupted every 2 minutes or so by the staff, who needed multiple prescriptions checked urgently before being handed out to the customers. So it's clearly an insanely busy place. The pharmacist then tells me I need to attend a week-long induction course at a city about 2 hours away, and I would have to attend the whole week without pay. Then he told me that although I would be part-time, I would be expected to cover other people's shifts frequently because there is a problem with absences of staff. I asked why there were so many absences. He told me, "It is very busy here, and people get ill with stress and have to take long periods off work. I said I wasn't interested in the job, politely thanked him, and left. About 2 days later, I got an email from them saying, "Dear Suzanne, unfortunately, you have not been successful. My name isn't Suzanne." I dodged a bullet there. Story 88. First shift at a new restaurant bartending gig. I arrive and I'm told to go in the back and wash dishes. There is an unbelievably insane amount of dirty dishes and no manager on duty to correct the mix-up, show me where to clock in, or train me on anything I'd need to know. I'm there for about 45 minutes when I see the kitchen staff drop a huge bowl of lettuce for salad on the dirty kitchen floor, pick it back up, and take it out to the salad bar. As an experienced waiter and bartender, this horrified me. That's when I left and never returned. Story 89. I was getting interviewed to work third shift for a house with mentally disabled people. Me. How many clients do you all care for when at maximum capacity? Interviewer. About 3 to 4 per household? Me. Okay, how many staff will I be working with? Interviewer. It will only be you during the night. And are any of your clients violent? Interviewer. Yes, but we have safety plans so you can defend yourself. The plan they're referring to is run and hide. I could not leave fast enough. Towards the end of last year, a client in a facility like this in my town killed a worker because she was the only one there to work a third shift. Story 90. I had applied for a job with a major corporation and gotten an interview. On the day of the interview, someone from HR called to confirm that I was still coming. I said that I was. Everything seemed normal, and I went to the interview. Once I get there, I end up waiting 45 minutes for the interview to start. When it finally does, the interviewer seems to be rushing me and cutting me off. At the end, literally the second I stop talking after answering the final question, the interviewer says, "Honestly, this was all a waste of time because we offered the job to someone else last week." I knew that they had been conducting interviews for 2 weeks, meaning that they had chosen someone before interviews had concluded and a bunch of people had wasted their time bothering to come. So disrespectful. I probably dodged a bullet. Story 91. Asked if I was married or had children. She said since I wasn't married and didn't have children, I wouldn't need the job as much and would be more likely to quit. Another job as a stock person at a welding fabrication company, the woman before me quit because she was being harassed by the workers. Because they were short on welders and didn't want to fire them, they wanted someone who was more tolerant to being harassed. The guys during the interview were clearly gits and thought it was funny. The woman got mad and quit. Story 92. They didn't ask me a single interview question, just asked the same exact information I filled out on the application. Tried to have a real talk with me, saying I probably didn't have enough experience. It was for a serving job, which I've been in the restaurant business for 7 years under the same corporation that the restaurant I was applying for owned. Then asked me if I wanted to be a host for the tipped minimum wage. Nope. Story 93. At a boutique law firm, the office manager made a clear point that the men must always wear suit and tie. Attendance is checked every morning and every evening, and the firm keeps a strict, formal atmosphere. I appreciate the honesty, but I am a professional adult, capable of managing my own schedule and wardrobe, like every other attorney I've ever known. So, no thanks. Another firm frankly admitted their culture is up or out, aka, you have a bad year, you're fired. Again, thanks for the honesty, and nope. Story 94. Was told, come in for an interview. I drove 1 hour in Dallas traffic, got to a huge lot with multiple buildings and barely any parking. After searching for 20 minutes, I finally find their office and am given a tour for 5 minutes. Another 5 minutes of shadowing an employee. Then I finally meet the manager. He shakes my hand, says this is a cool place to work, and then leaves to go to the gym. They said thanks for coming and that they might call me for an interview in the next few days. Duck that. I'd held off on an offer with a better company as a courtesy, but I accepted immediately after that bullcrap. Don't lie to the applicants. Story 95. I was referred to the job by an acquaintance. Halfway through the interview, it's blatantly obvious that I have the job. She then completely switches personalities and starts ranting about how her employees are pieces of crap and she's hiring a new batch of employees, but that her current ones don't know. She then said it was an hourly job, but if we didn't sell a certain amount, then we wouldn't get paid until we got better at our jobs. I got the job and never showed up. Also told the acquaintance everything she said. Story 96. I interviewed at a major recruitment firm in London. After initially telling me that I was wrong in being motivated by helping others, that the rest of them were money motivated, he then asked me why I liked money. Apparently the answer was not obvious enough. After that, he gave me 2 scenarios. I was wrong in choosing the answer to most benefit the client. The correct one was to screw over the client and make profit for myself. I walked out after that. Story 97. Them. If you're going to get pregnant, we'd rather you didn't do it in your first year here, and we'd want you to quit before then because we don't do maternity cover. Them. Looking me, a slightly chubby girl, up and down. But that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon, so you can ignore that. Sadly, I took the job because I was desperate, but I was out of there as soon as possible. Story 98. So what's with all this disability crap? I was interviewing with a medium-sized law firm, and my resume included a lot of disability advocacy work, including running a national advocacy organization. Story 99. Applying at a veterinary hospital that had opened recently. I had 6 years experience at the time. The veterinarian shows me his clinic. It's all brand new high-tech expensive equipment. He then tells me he's in debt $160,000 to the bank and that all of his employees volunteer at the clinic for 2 weeks before he hires them to make sure they're the right fit. Yeah, nope. Was tempted to ask for my resume back. Story 100. They said I had to be okay with working mandatory overtime every week, 8 hours Saturday in addition to MF, for an indefinite amount of time, since they had all been doing it since May. It was October. No thanks, not for what they were paying. Employers of Reddit, what's the worst CV you've ever seen? Story 1. We were hiring for a position in it recently. One applicant was this lady, around 60. Used to work in it in the 90s, then quit to watch her daughter's children. Most recent job was cashiering in a supermarket. From her CV, I learned when she was 17, she visited the US for a couple of weeks on a student exchange program where she met David. They fell in love. Afterwards, they kept in contact until he eventually came to our country and they got married. They had an exciting life, being roadies for rock bands and such. Somewhere along the line, they managed to finish uni and had 2 daughters. David was the love of her life. Then something happened. Unfortunately, she didn't elaborate. And David isn't in her life anymore. I never found out whether he died or they got divorced or something. She devoted all her energy to her daughters and their offspring since that was all she had left of David. Now after the grandchildren are old enough, she wants to work in it again. David's name appeared in the application, CV plus cover letter, a whopping 17 times. Sometimes I wonder what happened to him. Story 2. I think it was submitted as a joke, I hope, but it had official header info, name and contact info, but was blank underneath and said, in hand scrawl, me need worky. What bothered me most is that I would have spelled it worky story 3. I do staffing and you wouldn't believe the resumes I've seen. One time I was trying to fill a 3rd shift warehouse role for minimum wage, and it was a super urgent need for our client and in a remote area. The only guy with experience I could get to bite was very interesting. All his resume said was, I've done warehouse stuff for a long time. I have duck you tatted on my forehead. Please let me get in. Front of you though, I'm the definition of don't judge a book by the cover. Screened the guy, Skyped with him, and had him come in to meet with me. He was great. I let the client know what to expect before sending him on the interview. They hired him on the spot. Story 4. I work for one of the largest staffing firms in the United States, so I've seen probably well over 1,000 CVs in my tenure here. I wouldn't say this was a bad CV, more that it was just the funniest one I've ever seen. We receive a lot of applications through typical job boards such as Indeed or Career Builder, and when they apply, we get sent an email that has their CV attached to it with the job they applied for. We received numerous applications from one person, and when we opened the CV attachment, expecting to see their experience, it was actually a 1-page description of how this particular man cheated on his girlfriend multiple times, and this was how she was getting back at him. By screwing him out of the positions he was trying to apply for by replacing his CV with this document. Easily one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my 2 years at this company. We laughed about it for hours. Story 5. Unfortunately, the worst I've ever seen was submitted by my friend who I vouched for before he submitted his resume. Now we were in all the same college classes and mostly all the same project groups. So his resume could have contained all the same stuff my first resume did, plus what he did the 2 years out of college. I didn't have a whole lot of impressive stuff being just out of college when I applied, but it was well formatted and thought out. He submitted a jumbled pile of crap. There was at least 4 different fonts, random missing bullets, no sort of organization, missing important dates and keywords. We did the hiring as a team, but my boss handed me his resume and asked, "Is this your friend? Is this what he's capable of?" To be honest, I was shocked, because my friend did well in school and was pretty intelligent. All I could say was, he's better in person and can figure stuff out even if he's never learned it before. I got him the interview, and my boss wouldn't put him past the first interview. He said it was a horrible interview, and my friend showed no interest and couldn't elaborate on any of the bullet points on his resume whatsoever. It was absolutely shocking and embarrassing for me. Story 6. I'm not sure if it's the worst, but it was the most entertainingly bad. You know in Legally Blonde where Reese Witherspoon gives out her resume and it's on pink scented paper? I got one like that about 3 years ago, which, looking it up on Google just now to confirm, made this reference 15 years out of date, though if it was scented, I missed it. The resume started off literally her first paragraph. A paragraph. talking about how Legally Blonde was her favorite movie. It was full of doodles in the margins and specifically requested I not contact her previous employers because she felt she was fired unfairly, and instead listed several sorority sisters as references. She compared herself to L.A. Woods several times, explicitly saying any hiring manager who wouldn't hire her off of this resume was doing so because they couldn't handle her individuality. I'm honestly not entirely sure if this was a legit resume or some kind of joke. It had almost nothing to do with the job listing. My manager joked that BuzzFeed was going to write about me if I didn't call. The job went unfilled. We chose literally no one over this. Story 7. I received a resume by email from John. The email address had the name as George listed. The resume was for Max. So 3 different names for one resume. As if that wasn't bad enough, it was more of a story of his life in paragraph format than citing his skills. Story 8. Just yesterday, I was interviewing a girl that mentioned sexual curiosity in her CV. So it's the middle of the interview, and I randomly ask her if she is confident with SQL, to which she responds, "Well, I personally don't know how it works, but my boyfriend is a programmer and is very good at it." No, we did not hire her boyfriend. Story 9. Not unusual or sadly unique, but when I was working at Pub, I was good mates with the manager, and we'd often have a scan through CVS that had been dropped in by young people looking for a job after they left school. Most of these kids were like 16 or 17 at most, but had CVs that ran to 3 or 4 pages. Even someone in their 40s going for a high-flying management job at a world-leading financial company on a few million pounds a year should only have 1 or 2 pages max. These kids had done nothing aside from GCSE and maybe a paper round, bit of volunteering at most. And that's perfectly fine and reasonable when you're 16 and straight out of school. What the hell do they get taught in school? To fill out as much crap as possible to make it look good? Why aren't schools teaching them that writing about how they enjoy going to the cinema or gardening with their dad, a genuine inclusion, is not going to get them a job? It was waiting on work at a country pub, putting nothing except, "I have all my limbs and the normal number of chromosomes," would have overqualified them. Story 10. Several years ago, I had the misfortune of interviewing a fellow for a role in a film shoot. Although the production technically had a human resources professional in charge of screening resumes, they were far better versed in the recruiting process than they were in what qualifications were necessary for the job. As a result, less than half an hour before I was supposed to meet with the man in question, I was handed a document that would have made most pathological liars blush. According to the resume, my interviewee had been an uncredited consultant on over 100 feature films. While there certainly are cases in which a given worker goes uncredited, it has even happened to me, the sheer magnitude of the fellow's claim went well beyond the realm of believability. Furthermore, the guy had listed quite a few alleged skills that seemed to suggest a less than complete knowledge of the industry. My favorite claim was that he had expert-level Apple box skills. For the record, an Apple box is literally a wooden box. That's it. There are a few different sizes, and they're used whenever something like a plant, a small piece of furniture, or Tom Cruise, needs to be stacked on top of a box. I went ahead with the interview anyway, if only because I was curious about how the guy would back up his various claims. He turned out to be maybe 20 years old, which was far too young to have worked on many of the films that he had listed. When pressed, he explained that he had consulted on each of them by writing letters to the people involved in the production, in which he outlined several suggestions on various things. Suffice it to say, he didn't get the job, though I'm certain that he listed himself as an uncredited consultant on it, simply because he attended the interview. Story 11. My old boss kept a file of CVs he thought were terrible and pulled them out here and there for a laugh. This is for an ESL school, so there were a few from non-native English speakers with really obvious spelling mistakes that should have been caught by any spell check program. And then there was the guy who attached like 10 passport photos of himself to the file. Like, why? 1 maybe, but 10? Why so many? You could just feel the ego dripping out of every sentence, in the whole thing too. Story 12. I helped my old boss scan through CVs a while back. A student applying for a job as a barista. Their opening line, "I don't believe coffee is a drink. I believe it is an experience, and you need me to be the face of that journey." He had a little waffle about how coffee changed his life and molded him as a person, how coffee has been his savior in university. This kid seemed to really be into coffee. It was well written, but we were a coffee shop in a shopping center. We didn't need his prose. He was an English student, and the CV read as if it was a piece of coursework. The whole thing was in Comic Sans, and the only experience he had down was coffee drinker for 19 years. The kid was 19, and he didn't get the job, but I'm sure he graduated well with how well the opening letter was written, though. Story 13. I'm not making this up. I was doing the hiring for a company, and a guy put on a line of his qualities, that he was smarter than the average bear, for those of you that don't know, This was a favorite line from the main character in the cartoon Yogi Bear. Story 14. Wasn't really bad, but he did have a section that stood out. Health in good health. I was hiring EMTs for a health screening, so I can kind of understand it, but just weird. Story 15. Wasn't a CV, but the actions of the individual. Back in the day, I was a department manager at McDonald's. There was a customer that was being a total banana to my cashier by yelling at her saying she made the food wrong. She only took the order, didn't make the food, said they were overcharged due to race, and just making a huge scene overall. I had to step in to try to get them to shut up and back the duck off of my poor cashier. Said a whole finally sat down and ate their food. After this, Karen was done eating. She asked another shift manager that had just clocked in, hence missed the whole ordeal, for an application. My cashier told me about it, so I told all crew and the other manager that I was to be the one to accept the application. I hung out by the registers while a whole customer filled out their application at the table they ate at, which was still covered by their trash and even had their little water cup, which they used for soda instead. Water cups were small and clear, so it was obvious. Finally, a whole customer walked up to the counter with application and soda-filled water cup and asked to sumbit their application. I took it while wearing my customer service smile and told her that if she cleans her table, then I might consider adding her application to our list. Surprisingly, she did as I watched and wrote down her name for later. Afterwards, she came back and asked in a fake-ass voice, when should she expect a call? To which I replied, by tearing up the application and throwing it in the trash, while I said she probably should leave before the cops showed up to charge her with stealing soda. No, I didn't really call in. She flipped her lid and went into another tantrum saying my crew and I were being idiot and that she'd sue us for it. I just laughed and said if she wanted to try and press charges, she could wait outside for the cops to show up. However, not only would I press charges for her stealing, but I'd also press charges for verbal assault, disturbing the peace, and loitering. As she was leaving, I yelled that she was banned, and if she were to ever come back, we'd call the cops on her for trespassing. Her name was added to the list of do not hire, and thankfully, I didn't see her again. McDonald's sucks ass, but I did what I could to be petty to the customers that deserved it and tried to have my crews back. Story 16. Not an employer, but looked over CVs to create a shortlist for a job. Worst was one that was half complete, got halfway and had a line that said to be completed later. The other, not a CV, but a covering letter about why they wanted the job, what they could do, etc., but it completely missed the point of the job/job description. We were defending claims, and this letter went on about helping claimants, doing the claimants justice. Both got rejected as the job involved attention to detail and research. Neither had proven they could do this. Story 17. I received one which just said, I have no skills because I never worked before, but I have my JID, nothing else. On a different resume I received, the candidate listed his height. He was 5 feet 5 inches. I don't know why he thought that would be relevant. Story 18. It was worst I've ever seen, but also my favorite. My company does business with a certain family-friendly theme park. This means our employees can't have visible tattoos and crazy hair colors. They need to be able to pass the substances screening, background check, etc. I received a resume for a sales position from a guy we will call Andrew. I just pulled it back up so I can quote it word for word. The cover letter said, "Hey, what's good? I have worked at almost every fast food place around, but now it's time to try something new. I don't know how to do retail, but I'll learn." I don't have official sales experience of the legal kind of, you know what I mean. But that was a few weeks ago, and I'm not like that no more. On his resume, he listed the places he worked at and had descriptions such as take people's orders and clean up their messes, and take people's orders, money, and give them their crap. I thought the resume was submitted as a joke until I looked Andrew up on Facebook. He had an uncommon last name and found his profile. Story 19. I had a guy who sent in a resume where he had accidentally pasted an internet banner ad for adult to the top of it. Who knows how many of those he sent out. Story 20. I work in higher ed, and my last role included being responsible for tracking all the applications of interest, which was a year-round open application for adjuncts who might be available to teach last minute. This one guy kept popping up over and over again when I would update my spreadsheet for the hiring committee. He went to a lot of trouble to create a new username for each submission because, since it was always open, you can't reapply for the same position. That dude's CV was just one page, and I could never figure out why he was submitting it to me. There was nothing about teaching or education on the document, and he didn't include any people as references in the system. He would just type NA in the boxes or see resume. The single page was just his name in a really large font at the top. Everything was centered on the page too, followed by his place and date of birth, his wife's name, and when they got married, the names and birth dates of his children, including stepson, a long list of hobbies and interests, reading John Grisham, fishing, vacations with family, TV shows. That was it. I don't know if he thought an expression of interest was just like expressing his interest, and I always wondered why he dedicated so much time to apply for a job I wasn't sure he understood. Story 21. I worked in a cafe, and the guy whose job was to wash dishes showed me his CV for an upcoming job interview. It specified that he can cut Mahone cheese, very good thin slice. The job was for security. Story 22. About 2 years ago, I was hiring for a new marketing assistant when one of my current marketing assistants walked over and told me I had to read a resume. It was pretty straightforward, right until I got to the footer where the sentence, "too beautiful not to be hired," was centered and bolded. We were all laughing at the audacity of putting that on a resume and wondering if it was a legitimate response. I ended up giving her a phone call to come in for an interview based solely off that statement. The rest of the resume was fine. I was hiring an assistant, not a nuclear physicist. I figured it would be a good idea to conduct the interview with a female employee in the room. She was truly beautiful, and it might not be an exaggeration to say she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever had an actual conversation with. But there was no way I was going to hire her. I had the female employee give her a call the next day, thank her for her time, but explain we were going to go with someone with more experience. Speaking of bad resumes, there's a growing trend of infographic resumes for younger applicants. I'm only one man, but I can't help but feel it's a terrible idea. It's an especially bad idea when you rate yourself in certain categories, like 3 out of 5 stars in customer service. I don't even know what that means, but why the heck would you put 3 out of 5 stars? Story 23, a sparse resume with a glamour shot picture, taking up half the page. One kid didn't know what was on his CV because his mother did it for him. She's the one making him get a job. The amount of mothers who called me trying to get their kids a job. One straight out said, she needs him to get out of the house during the day. One mother came into the interview and started answering questions for the kid. One guy brought his entire extended family and let them run around the office building after I asked them to step out for privacy. But you were asking about CV. One person put a fake college from a movie about making a fake college. People put personal info, like TMI. Some is subjective. One potential employer scoffed at a resume because the person noted her preferred pastry-based nickname. It went right into the trash. One woman listed her gluten allergy under activities. I actually have a ton. I ran a small agency for years by myself after my brother passed. It hurt my faith in humanity on so many levels. It also opened my eyes on inequalities. Story 24, a guy's resume read like a story told in the third person. James has been interested in it since he took his first computer class at High. He always excelled at typing, getting high marks in his word processing course at high school. Since then, he has moved on to deeper knowledge with computers, computer systems, and what makes them tick. James built his first computer in his bedroom from parts he scavenged from Skid Row in 1996. He gained a great amount of still learning how components fit together and how hardware and software join together to make synergies. He took this love of commuters and worked at PC repair in the summer of 2001, building, repairing, and reinstalling hardware, software, and operating systems, OSs, and on for several more paragraphs. Typos included. Story 25, my mill once got one for her accounting office that was a bog-standard CV for a low-ranking accounting position. And attached to it was a huge glossy photo of the applicant on the beach, sprawled on the sand at sunset with a focus on her ample assets. Story 26. I was hiring for a lab tech position at a university, so you tend to see lots of chemistry and biology majors. I received one resume and cover letter that I'll never forget. First, her name was spelled differently in literally every single instance of it appearing. The entire resume was in a variety of fonts and sizes and varying shades of orange and brown text. It was 8 pages long and described every job she had ever had, with multiple bullet points under each one. At minimum, 5 pages of it was devoted to describing what she did at various part-time retail jobs since she was like 17. The cover letter had a dark blue background, but it was like a big rectangle on a page of paper, so it had a frame of white margin around it. Her contact info was in a lighter blue box at the top with dark blue text, and the body of her cover letter was in light blue on the dark blue background. It was incredibly difficult to read if you didn't zoom in, and it refused to print legibly. She mentioned several times throughout this whole thing that she was very interested in graphic design and hoped she'd be able to use those skills in the job. A lab job in research with no advertising or anything else we might need designed graphically. Her degree was in math with absolutely no lab experience. Story 27. I got a resume from an actual escort once. She included it on her resume. Along with the name of the company and website, you could go to book her services listed under her job description was assessing and meeting clients' needs and desires. Story 28. We were hiring for flight dispatchers at my previous company. Come across a guy's resume where it says he was a train operator / engineer. We were intrigued as to why someone would leave working for UP, BNSF, etc. for a flight dispatcher position until we read the second page, which had the actual job description. He was the conductor of the train inside the local mall for kids. Kudos for the wordplay, but don't waste my time. Story 29. This definitely isn't the worst. I didn't get to see his CV. My supervisor did, and we hired him anyway. So I'm training him, and we have a kind of break, so I'm asking him some casual questions about how he likes the job. He proceeds to tell me about over 10 jobs he has held in less than 10 years. He says that work really never suits him, and he's still trying to find himself. He's got to be about 50. How do you still not know what you want to do for work at that age? I text my boss my findings, and he responds, that's only the jobs that we know of. I think he's had even more in that time period. Okay, we're like always understaffed here, but it takes 3 months to train someone for this job. How are we hiring someone who might get bored shortly after being trained? He lasted 6 months before asking to transfer to another program in our company. Less than 6 months later, he left. Story 30. My dad owns a vacuum repair business. One bloke sent a CV in, he misspelled vacuum. That's not a big deal. Vacuum's a weird word to spell. His CV was rife with spelling and punctuation errors, but it's an engineering job, so that's not much of a concern. If he can fix a vacuum, who gives a damn if he knows the difference between there and there? The main problem was that he wrote the CV all in caps and had no previous engineering experience. Not even theoretical, he'd had no education in it. Story 31. I just had a pretty entertaining one. Picture of the person applying, what I think was supposed to be the local time, and plenty of bullets. Each bullet was highlighted in a blue or green, then at the end of many of them, it just said neglected. All these skills neglected. WTF? Story 32. Mine. Unemployed farts didn't have Word, and this was before Google Docs, so all I had was Open Office. A short descriptor of me in a paragraph, followed by a bullet point of my skill sets and experience, followed by a short paragraph of career highlights, followed by more bullet points of businesses that I worked for. I got a phone interview with it. Holy crap. I got an in-person interview. I get to the interview with my portfolio containing printed copies of my resume for the interview. Interviewer also had printed copies of my resume, except they have Office. The bullet point translations between Open Office and Word were amazing. The thing was formatted as if a 4-year-old wrote it. Didn't get the job, but got all the way to an in-person interview with this travesty of a resume. Converted my resume to PDF after that, and no more formatting issues. Story 33. Let me tell you about Solid. This resume came across my desk for a standard Java server dev role. This resume listed the letters SOLID down the side of the first half of the first page, and had a paragraph that started with each letter that described their talents. However, some of the talents were not remotely things that I'd describe as strengths, for super cool or something. It's been a while, I forget what they supposedly stood for, but it got weirder from there. They had this kind of word art beyond the solid section that continued to describe talents and projects in what I can only describe as English, because it didn't scan syntactically. It was like much think, very code. So my leads and I toyed with bringing this person in just to experience this in person, but alas, sanity prevailed. Story 34. I had 2 girls, roughly 19 to 23, come in and apply for a job. Both at the same time gave me resumes that the only change on them was the name, otherwise identical. They were also crap resumes because they had no previous job experiences and the only thing listed were high school poetry awards. Also printed in color with a light blue background and flowery border. Story 35. Sort of relevant. I spent a couple of college breaks working in the admissions department of a university, helping to file applications. I got an app once from a guy whose 3 required recommendations came from his mom, his best friend, and oops, he didn't do a 3rd one. His mom's, of course, was glowing. He's such a nice young man. Very polite, has lots of friends. His buddy started out complimenting him along the same not at all related to school lines, but as the rec went on, he started second-guessing himself. He got good grades in school, but actually he cut class a lot. I think he also got into a couple fights this year. The letter was also written by hand in pencil. It cost $75 to apply. Story 36. Not a CV, but a phone interview for a simple laborer's job. I asked the guy one simple question pertaining to the requirement of the job. Are you physically capable of digging, raking, and pushing a wheelbarrow full of soil? The man said, yes. Next morning, he shows up at the job site, and he is a cripple. Could barely walk at all. Story 37. Managed an electronics retail store. So not too many resumes, but lots of terrible applications nonetheless. Had someone listed being tall and swimming as skills. Recently, had someone who did attach a resume in which he put both his references and experience as available upon request, and listed his nationality, birth date, parents' names, and marital status below a selfie. Story 38. I needed someone to work at a gas station. Guy applied, and his resume said he was the assistant manager everywhere he worked previously, except he abbreviated it without punctuation. That's right. He was a 5-time ass man looking to pump your tank. Story 39. The resume stated that the applicant had graduated college in early 00s, but he only had one job listed, and it was only for 1 year and ended more than 5 years ago. Obviously, I looked the guy up to figure out what the hell he'd been doing the other 15+ years after he graduated. Found that most recently he was in jail for eating paper off the walls in a courtroom after losing a small claims suit that he filed over a futon. Let me repeat that. He ate paperwork off the wall. Needless to say, I didn't call him for an interview. Story 40. I've worked in recruitment for almost 4 years now. I've seen some of the worst CVs ever. Here are some examples. 1. Some people would put God-fearing as one of their qualifications. I mean, I get we're a religious country, but like, why 2? Skills, accounting. 3. Those that have insert text here that was left unedited. 4. I would get CVS/resumes sent through my email that they probably forgot to rename, e.g. resumeofmine.pdf and many more I can't recall at the moment. Story 41. I used to hire for a company that only had as requirements valid driver's license, over the age of 21, and clean driving record. The CV I received was reasonable enough in terms of experience, customer service, and such. What was bad was the phone interview. I was basically having a conversation with myself. Me. I see you have experience in customer service. Can you elaborate? Person. Yeah, I worked customer service. M. Can you tell me of a situation where you've had to deal with a difficult customer? Yeah, M. Have you worked in other sectors of customer service other than retail? Yeah, and so on. Needless to say, he was not brought in for an in-person interview. Story 42. A supplier of ours announced a major price increase by asking each account manager to email their clients. Our account manager decided to send one email in CC, not BCC, all of her clients, giving everyone access to each other's contact info. It's a competitive industry, and this is an absolute no-no for reasons I won't get into. Worse, as part of that email, she forwarded the chain of internal emails originating from their senior executives that explicitly stated the 20% across-the-board price increase applies to all customers except for companies, leaving it there for all of their competitors to see. Story 43. Not an employer, but I used to work in the copy and print section of Staples, and we had a small collection of funny resumes that people would come to get printed out. Comic Sans, Papyrus, Smileys, you name it. People are wild. My absolute favorite was a woman who put an email something to the effect of Moody Karen 123. At the top of a resume, she was presumably going to be leaving at schools to get substitute teaching jobs. Under the related skills section, she simply put I like horses. Story 44. Multiple fonts throughout and not in an organized way. The sentence would start with one font, then change to another halfway through. A ton of typos. Indentation wasn't consistent. It was like they C&P from a bunch of other random CVs, resumes, and then didn't correct the formatting. So just visually, it was horrible to look at. Then when you got into the meat of it, they greatly inflated their prior job descriptions in the handled transactions for multi-million-dollar company. Was cashier at McDonald's kind of way, but on everything. Story 45, one that had babysitting experience, just a first name, and her objective was just a Star Trek quote edit. Just babysitting experience. And she was like 25. Story 46. Had one once that specifically said he wouldn't like qualifications as they intimidated employers, and we wouldn't offer him a job if he did list them. The entire CV was just a bullcrap list of, I'm amazing, and you should employ me, and I'm not going to tell you why I'm amazing as it will intimidate you. We hadn't even listed a job. It was dropped in at reception by someone passing by. Needless to say, we never contacted him about a job. Story 47, and it was not necessarily the CV as it got thrown in the trash as soon as it was handed to me. It was the woman wearing the bright pink tank top that said Pimpette in bedazzled letters. This was at a high-end chain furniture and home decor store. Story 48. I'm trying to hire an employee right now, and I've had tons of people just say they don't have resumes. Another guy just refused to have an interview. Said, put me on a job site or I'm out. What the duck is wrong with people? Clearly, nobody taught these people how to apply for a job. Story 49. It was just a bulleted list. No sections or anything, just bullets. And none of them were descriptive at all. He didn't even say what positions he worked in. The bullet would be, Worked at X company from dash 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 Who was working on an advanced degree at a very prestigious university, then abruptly left the field before finishing the degree and moved halfway across the country for a career change, followed by a 4-year gap in their work history before returning to their original career. Did a Google search, because that seemed really odd, and they were on an offender registry. The gap and sudden career changes suddenly made sense. Story 51. A friend of mine is dating just the worst person imaginable. She has video games under her additional skills section. Not to mention the formatting of her resume is a disaster. She intentionally never capitalizes a letter. It starts right-aligned, then the next section is left-aligned. It repeats this stagnation throughout and is not pleasant to read. Constantly laments on social how she can't get a job. I wonder why. Story 52. I can tell you what is the worst CV. It's mine. I applied for a great job around 6 months ago and sent my CV alongside it in an email. However, what I didn't realize was that attached to my CV was one of the most depraved adult videos you've ever seen. Suffice to say, I never got the job, but I did get a not-so-friendly phone call from the police. Story 53. I'll go ahead and share A girl handed in a CV with a cover letter. She spelt her own first name wrong. You see, she had her first name, can't remember now, let's just say Michelle, on her CV, but then referred to herself as Michelle on the cover letter. It wasn't as subtle as my example. As I recall, they were very different spellings of the same name. Story 54. I'm not currently an M-peer, although I've hired occasionally in the past. Worst one was from a friend who wanted my assistance, 4 pages long and filled with time from their Girl Scouts. Also, they hadn't held a job for longer than 2 weeks. Story 55. I've seen some terrible ones in my time, but one thing I can recommend is don't use emojis. It is happening with an increasing frequency, and it makes me instantly want to throw your CV in the trash. It's not edgy, cool, funny, ironic, or acceptable. Story 56. I work in a grocery store. I was hiring for a part-time cashier. Really, all I need is for you to fill out the online application. Someone submitted a resume that was 7 or 8 pages long, listing every job they'd ever had. And most of the jobs were like 1 to 2 months. It definitely made me not want to hire them. Story 57. His major employer was the Daystrom Institute. When I asked about it, I was just a stand-in interviewer. He said that nobody else noticed. I passed him to the next interviewer and told them he was definitely the creative type they were looking for. I believe he got the job, entry-level programmer. Story 58. I'm a software recruiter and have been for 10 years, so have seen a billion CVs in my life. I once saw one where the candidate wrote a several-paragraph essay on operatic death metal as their hobbies and interests section. Doesn't make it the worst resume ever, but definitely an odd strategy. Story 59. Someone just listed skills, e.g. leadership, as a subheading and said, "To be honest, I don't have great leadership," and so on. CV was basically just a list of skills this person didn't have, but mentioned anyway. Story 60. Literally the opening of the cover letter. Greater than I was recently charged with damage to property and a hate crime in Chicago and have a swastika tattoo on my back. Greater than I'm interested in a finance or accounting position. Story 61. Not an employer, but was at the front desk. Fella brought in his birth certificate, nothing else. That was his resume. Had to tell him we're a satellite office, and he'd have to go to the main campus, thankfully. Story 62. I once replied to a job posting at a game publishing company where they asked for your favorite meme and why. I wrote up ridiculous stuff and somehow got the job. Still working there 2 years later. Story 63. Art student applying for a science museum position. She had colorful frames around different sections of her resume. The frames were pixelated images and the colors clashed horribly. Her name and section titles were in Jokerman. She also wasn't qualified, and it was a position with very minimal qualification.